An alien girl's last hope, humanity's fierce warriors. The screams of the tortured Vixar girl pierced the night, but no one on Zeus Prime paid any attention. No one, except for a human in a dimly lit corner of a seedy bar. Michael Jones downed his whiskey and slammed the glass on the table. The hardened ex-Marine turned mercenary, scanning the room. His eyes moved from one alien face to another, tension crackling in the air like a live wire. A hooded figure approached his table and sat down across from him. "You're Michael Jones, the human mercenary," the figure asked, keeping his voice low. Michael leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Who's asking?" The figure pulled back his hood, revealing the scaly green skin and bulbous eyes of a Vixar. "I am Vortis, a diplomat of the Vixar people. I need your help." Michael snorted. "I don't do diplomacy." "It's not diplomacy I need." Vortis leaned forward, his voice urgent. "It's your skills as a warrior. My daughter Aria has been kidnapped by a rival clan. They plan to sacrifice her to their gods in a barbaric ritual." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And you came to me because?" "Because no one else will help us." Vortis slammed his fist on the table, drawing stares from the other patrons. He lowered his voice. "The Vixar are seen as primitive and warlike, but you humans, you have a reputation for getting the job done, no matter the cost." Michael considered for a moment. The money was good, and the job sounded challenging. But more than that, something about Vortis' desperation stirred a sense of duty in him, one he thought he'd left behind in the Marines. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but I play by my own rules." Vortis nodded, relief flooding his features. "Anything. Just bring my daughter back alive." Michael stood up, towering over the Vixar. "I'll bring her back, but you better have my money ready. And if you're lying to me," he let the threat hang in the air. Vortis swallowed hard. "I understand." As Michael strode out of the bar, he couldn't shake the feeling that this job would be different. Saving an alien girl from a blood sacrifice was a far cry from his usual gigs. But then again, he was a human. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was doing the impossible, even if it meant getting knee-deep in alien blood to do it. The journey to Vox Prime was long and arduous. Michael and Vortis took a small, unmarked spacecraft to avoid drawing attention. As they broke through the atmosphere, Michael got his first glimpse of the Vixar homeworld. Vox Prime was wild and untamed, with sprawling jungles and jagged mountain ranges stretching on forever. Vortis guided the ship toward the capital city of Vortex. As they flew over the dense jungle canopy, Michael spotted the city in the distance. It was a strange blend of ancient stone temples and modern metal structures, all surrounded by a high wall. As they landed on a platform just outside the city gates, Michael noticed the looks he was getting from the Vixar guards. They eyed him with a mix of suspicion and hostility, their hands resting on the plasma rifles at their hips. "Stay close to me," Vortis muttered as they walked through the gates. "And try not to make eye contact with anyone." Michael couldn't help but chuckle. "I thought I was the dangerous one here." Vortis shook his head. "You don't understand. To the Vixar, humans are nothing more than violent, unpredictable savages. They think you can't be trusted." "That's rich coming from a bunch of lizards who still practice blood sacrifices," Michael scoffed. As they made their way through the winding streets of Vortex, Michael could feel the eyes of the Vixar on him. He heard whispers in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was clear enough. These people didn't want him here. Vortis led him to a large, imposing structure in the center of the city. It was a massive stone pyramid with intricate carvings and glowing energy fields surrounding it. "The Grand Temple," Vortis said, his voice tinged with fear. "This is where they'll be holding the sacrifice." Michael studied the temple, his tactical mind already working on a plan. He counted at least a dozen guards patrolling the perimeter, all heavily armed with plasma weapons. "We need to find a way in through the back," he said, keeping his voice low. "Once we're inside, we'll have to move fast, find the girl and get her out before they even know what hit them." But as he took another look at the temple, Michael felt a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't going to be a simple smash-and-grab job. The Vuxar were clearly more advanced than he'd given them credit for, and they weren't going to give up their prize without a fight. He checked his own weapons, a plasma rifle and a few grenades. It would have to be enough. He'd faced worse odds before and come out on top. But something about this felt different. Maybe it was the fact that an innocent life was on the line, or maybe it was the way Vortis looked at him, with a mix of hope and desperation in his eyes. Either way, Michael knew one thing for sure: he was in for one hell of a fight. Michael crept through the shadows of the Grand Temple, his footsteps nearly silent against the stone floor. His years of training as a Marine had taught him how to move undetected, and he put those skills to use now as he slipped past the Vuxar guards. The temple was a maze of winding corridors and hidden chambers, but Michael's keen sense of direction kept him on track. As he rounded a corner, he heard voices coming from a nearby room. He pressed himself against the wall and inched closer, straining to make out the words. It was a group of Vuxar priests, their tones hushed and urgent. "The Emperor's daughter must die at the appointed hour," one of them said. "Only then can we seize control of the Empire." Michael's eyes widened. Arya wasn't just some random Var girl. She was the daughter of the Emperor himself. The stakes of this mission had just gotten a whole lot higher. He moved on, his mind racing. If the rival clan succeeded in sacrificing Arya, it could throw the entire Vuxar Empire into chaos. And if that happened, the repercussions could be felt throughout the galaxy. Finally, he reached the chamber where Arya was being held. The door was heavily fortified, with 2 armed guards standing watch. Michael knew he would only have one chance to get this right. He took a deep breath, then sprang into action, his plasma rifle blazing. The guards fell before they even had a chance to raise their weapons. Michael kicked open the door and burst into the chamber, ready for anything. But what he saw inside stopped him in his tracks. Arya was not the helpless damsel he had expected. She stood tall and proud, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. "It's about time you showed up," she said, her voice steady. "I was starting to think I'd have to rescue myself." Michael lowered his rifle, a grin spreading across his face. "I'm impressed. Not many people could stay so calm in a situation like this." Arya shrugged. "I'm not just any Vuxar. I allowed myself to be captured as part of a plan to expose the corruption in our government, but I didn't expect them to move so quickly with the sacrifice." Michael nodded, his mind already working on their escape route. "We need to get out of here before they realize what's happening. Can you fight?" Arya's eyes glinted. "Can a human shoot straight?" Michael laughed. "Fair enough. Let's move." Together, they raced out of the chamber and back into the winding corridors of the temple. Alarms blared in the distance. Their escape had been discovered. But with Arya by his side, Michael knew they could take on anything the Vuxar threw at them. As they ran, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for the young Vuxar warrior. She had risked everything to try and bring about change in her society, even if it meant sacrificing herself. It was a bravery and selflessness that he rarely saw in the galaxy, especially among the alien races. But there would be time to dwell on that later. Right now, they needed to focus on getting out of the temple alive. And with the entire Vuxar Empire hanging in the balance, failure was not an option. The escape plan, humanity's dangerous allies. The blaring of alarms echoed through the temple halls, the sharp sound growing louder as Arya and Michael raced through the narrow corridors. The walls, adorned with ancient symbols, seemed to close in on them, amplifying the urgency of their escape. Michael's heart pounded, his grip tight on his plasma rifle as they rounded another corner. Arya ran beside him, her movements swift and purposeful. Despite the danger they faced, Michael couldn't help but admire the Vuxar girl's determination. She was not just an imperial daughter, but a warrior in her own right. "This way." Arya pointed ahead, leading them down a winding staircase carved into the stone. "There's a hidden passage that leads outside the temple. We'll avoid the main exits. They'll be heavily guarded by now. Michael nodded, trusting her instincts. As they descended the steps, he could hear the sounds of approaching footsteps, the heavy thuds of armored guards closing in on their position. They didn't have much time. "How many guards are we dealing with?" Michael asked, his voice low but urgent. "Dozens," Arya replied, not slowing her pace. "But there'll be more spread out, searching the upper levels. If we move quickly, we might be able to slip past them." Michael glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of the first wave of guards entering the corridor they had just fled. Their reptilian eyes glinted in the dim light, and their weapons gleamed menacingly. "They're coming," he said, his tone grim. Arya didn't falter. "Then we run faster." The hidden passage was a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. It was dark and damp, the air thick with the scent of moss and decay. Michael's boots splashed through puddles of stagnant water as they hurried forward. Every step felt like a race against time. "How much further?" he asked, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "Not far," Arya replied. "The exit leads into the jungle, about 1 kilometer from the city's outer walls. Once we're there, we'll have some cover." Michael gritted his teeth. The jungle. Of course, it had to be the jungle. He'd seen enough alien wilderness in his time to know that the planet's flora and fauna would likely be as hostile as its people, but there was no turning back now. Suddenly, the tunnel widened, opening into a small chamber. Arya slowed to a stop, catching her breath as she inspected the stone door at the far end. It was covered in intricate carvings, similar to those they had seen throughout the temple, but these seemed older, more ancient. "This is it," Arya said, stepping toward the door. She ran her hand over the symbols, tracing the patterns with her fingers. "My ancestors built these passages centuries ago, before the city was even constructed. They're the only ones who know of them." Michael watched her work, his rifle at the ready. He could still hear the distant sound of boots echoing through the tunnel behind them. The guards were getting closer. "Any chance we can speed this up?" he asked, his eyes darting to the shadows. Arya frowned, concentrating as she pressed a sequence of symbols. "I'm trying. The mechanism is old. It takes time to." A low rumble interrupted her as the stone door began to shift. Slowly, it slid open, revealing a faint glow of moonlight on the other side. Arya let out a sigh of relief and turned to Michael. "Let's go." They slipped through the door and into the jungle beyond. The air was humid and heavy, the thick canopy overhead blocking most of the moonlight. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, covered in roots and vines that threatened to trip them with every step. Michael scanned the area, his senses on high alert. The jungle was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, alien birds screeching in the distance, the rustle of leaves as unseen animals moved through the underbrush. But there were no guards in sight, at least for now. "We need to keep moving," Arya said, her voice barely a whisper. "Once they realize we've escaped through the tunnels, they'll send search parties into the jungle. We need to reach the extraction point before they catch up." Michael nodded. "Lead the way." They moved swiftly but carefully, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath them. The jungle seemed endless, the trees towering above them like silent sentinels. Michael's muscles were tense, his finger hovering near the trigger of his rifle as he scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the edge of the jungle. Beyond the tree line, Michael could see the city's outer walls in the distance, their stone surfaces illuminated by the faint glow of the distant city lights. "There," Arya said, pointing to a clearing just ahead. "Our extraction team will meet us here." Michael frowned. "Extraction team? I thought it was just the two of us." Arya shook her head. "I told you I've been planning this for months. I have allies within the Empire, those who oppose the corruption of the ruling class. They're waiting for us with a ship that will take us off-planet." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And you didn't think to mention this earlier?" "I didn't know if I could trust you," Arya admitted. "But after what you've done tonight, I believe you've earned that trust. Michael let out a low chuckle. Glad to know I made the cut. Suddenly, a sharp rustling sound came from the bushes behind them. Michael spun around, his rifle raised, but before he could react, a figure emerged from the shadows, its hands raised in a gesture of peace. Wait. Arya stepped forward, placing a hand on Michael's arm. He's one of ours. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a tall Vuxar male clad in dark, tactical armor. His scales were a deep shade of green, almost black, and his eyes glinted with intelligence. Commander Arya, the Vuxar said, bowing slightly. We've been waiting for you. Arya nodded. Thank you, General Krex. Is the ship ready? Krex nodded. It is, but we have a problem. Of course we do, Michael muttered under his breath. Krex glanced at him before turning back to Arya. The Emperor's forces have been alerted to your escape. They've locked down the city, and the airspace is being heavily monitored. We'll have to find another way off planet. Arya's brow furrowed. What about the underground resistance? Krex hesitated. They're still in hiding. The crackdown has been severe since your capture. We can't risk exposing them. Michael crossed his arms, his mind racing as he considered their options. What about the jungle? Is there a way to slip past the city's defenses through the wilderness? Krex shook his head. The jungle is crawling with predators, both natural and engineered. The Vuxar military has been using the jungle as a testing ground for biological weapons. It's too dangerous. So we're trapped, Michael said, his frustration evident. Arya remained silent for a moment, deep in thought. Then her eyes lit up with an idea. What about the human mercenaries? Both Michael and Krex turned to her in surprise. What? Michael asked, genuinely confused. I've heard stories of a group of human mercenaries operating in this sector, Arya explained. They've been known to work with resistance movements on other planets, helping them escape oppressive regimes. If we can contact them, they might be able to get us off-world. Michael raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we trust a bunch of raw humans we've never even met. Arya met his gaze, her expression resolute. Do we have a better option? Michael sighed. Fair point. Krex looked skeptical. And how do you propose we find these mercenaries? I've already made contact, Arya said, pulling out a small communications device from her belt. They were on standby in case our original plan failed. Michael couldn't help but smirk. You really thought of everything, didn't you? Arya didn't reply. She activated the device, sending a coded transmission into the night. For several tense moments, there was no response. Then, a crackling voice came through the device. This is Captain Reynolds of the Valkyrie. We received your signal, Arya. What's your status? Arya breathed a sigh of relief. We're at the extraction point, but the city is on lockdown. We need a way out. There was a brief pause on the other end before Captain Reynolds replied. Understood. We'll have a shuttle on its way to you in 10 minutes. But be advised, the city's air defenses are top-notch. We'll need a distraction if we're going to make it through. Arya looked to Michael. Can you handle that? Michael grinned. Leave it to me. As they waited for the mercenary shuttle to arrive, Michael, Arya, and Krex worked quickly to set up their distraction. Using the limited explosives they had on hand, they rigged several of the nearby trees with charges. The plan was simple: create enough chaos to divert the Vuxar military's attention away from the incoming shuttle long enough for them to make their escape. Are you sure this will work? Krex asked, his voice tense as he watched Michael set the last of the charges. Michael wiped sweat from his brow and nodded. It'll work. I've pulled off crazier stunts than this before. Arya handed Michael a detonator. We need to time this perfectly. The shuttle will be here in 5 minutes. Michael took the detonator and glanced at the sky. The moon was still high, casting an eerie glow over the jungle. The mercenaries' gamble. The jungle was silent except for the rhythmic chirping of alien insects and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Michael crouched low, hidden in the dense foliage with Arya and Krex by his side. He glanced at his watch. 3 minutes until the shuttle arrived. The explosives were set, and now it was a waiting game. "Stay sharp," Michael whispered. His gaze was fixed on the distant city walls, barely visible through the trees. "As soon as we blow those charges, things are going to get real messy." Krex shifted uneasily, his reptilian eyes scanning the jungle. "The Vixar military doesn't play around. If they realize what we're up to, we'll be overrun before the shuttle even touches down." Arya remained calm, her focus unwavering. "That's why we can't afford any mistakes. The timing has to be perfect." Michael nodded, gripping the detonator tightly. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating on borrowed time. Yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another day for him. A human soldier improvising against overwhelming odds. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint hum in the distance. It grew loud about a second, signaling the approach of the Valkyrie's shuttle. Michael could make out the faint glimmer of its lights through the thick canopy above. "That's our ride," he said, glancing at Arya and Krex. "Get ready." The shuttle descended cautiously, barely skimming the treetops as it approached their position. Its sleek, black exterior blended with the night, a stark contrast to the usual bright and grandiose ships favored by the Vixar elite. This was a mercenary ship, designed for stealth and speed, not luxury. Captain Reynolds' voice crackled over Arya's communicator. "We're in position. How's it looking down there?" Michael pressed the detonator to his ear, listening closely for any sign of the Vixar guards. The jungle was too quiet, and that made him uneasy. He glanced at Arya, giving her a silent nod. "Captain, we're about to set off a little light show," Arya replied, her voice steady. "Get ready to land. It's going to get chaotic." Reynolds' laugh was dry, with a hint of excitement. "Understood. We'll swoop in once the fireworks start. Just make sure the area's clear when we touch down." Michael shifted his weight and looked at Krex. "When I hit this, we're going to need every bit of speed you can muster. We'll only have a few seconds before they figure out where we are." Krex gave a stiff nod, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "We'll be ready." Michael's thumb hovered over the detonator, waiting for the signal from Arya. The air felt heavy, thick with the tension of the impending battle. Every second seemed to stretch into an eternity, the world narrowing to the sound of his own heartbeat. Then Arya raised her hand. "Now," she whispered. Without hesitation, Michael pressed the detonator. The jungle exploded with light and sound as the charges detonated in rapid succession. Trees shattered, and flames erupted from the blast sites, sending plumes of smoke into the air. The shockwave rippled through the ground, shaking the jungle like a violent storm. Instantly, the distant city walls were illuminated as spotlights swiveled toward the explosions. Alarms blared in the distance, and the sounds of Vixar soldiers shouting orders echoed through the air. The diversion had worked. "Go," Arya shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. The three of them bolted from their hiding spot, sprinting toward the clearing where the shuttle was descending. The underbrush tore at their legs, but they pushed forward, adrenaline fueling their every step. The hum of the shuttle's engines grew louder, its landing gear lowering as it prepared to touch down. Michael glanced over his shoulder and cursed. A squad of Vixar soldiers had emerged from the jungle behind them, their weapons raised and ready to fire. "Incoming," he shouted, raising his plasma rifle. He fired off a volley of shots, the blue plasma bolts lighting up the night. Several of the soldiers dove for cover, but one of them went down, his armor smoldering where the plasma had pierced it. Michael didn't stop to see the damage. He just kept running. Krex was already ahead of them, his longer strides carrying him toward the shuttle. Arya was close behind, her movements agile and quick despite the heavy firepower bearing down on them. As the shuttle's ramp lowered, Michael could see Captain Reynolds and a few other mercenaries inside, weapons at the ready. They provided covering fire, sending a hail of bullets and plasma rounds toward the pursuing Vexar soldiers. "Get on board," Reynolds barked, his voice cutting through the noise. Arya and Krex reached the ramp first, diving into the safety of the shuttle. Michael was right behind them, but a sudden burst of plasma fire forced him to duck and roll, narrowly avoiding being hit. He scrambled to his feet and dashed up the ramp, firing blindly over his shoulder as he did. The second Michael's boots hit the deck, the ramp began to close, sealing them inside the shuttle. The engines roared to life, and the vessel shot upward, lifting off the ground just as the Vexar soldiers reached the clearing. Plasma rounds pinged off the hull, but it was too late. The shuttle was already climbing higher, disappearing into the night sky. Michael collapsed against the wall, breathing hard as he looked around the cabin. Arya was kneeling beside Krex, checking in for injuries, while Reynolds and the other mercenaries secured their weapons. "Nice work," Reynolds said, giving Michael a nod. "That was a hell of a distraction." Michael managed a tired grin. "You've got no idea." Reynolds chuckled, then turned to Arya. "We're not out of the woods yet, Commander. The Vexar have scrambled fighters, and they're scanning for us. We're going to need to lay low for a bit before we make our next move." Arya stood, her expression tense but composed. "What are our options?" Reynolds pulled up a holographic map of the sector, highlighting a nearby asteroid field. "We can hide out in this asteroid belt for a while. It's dense enough to mask our signature from their scanners. Once things calm down, we can plot a course to the nearest jump point and get out of this system." Krex, still catching his breath, spoke up. "The Empire will have patrols sweeping the area. They won't stop until they're certain we're gone." Arya frowned. "Which means we need to get off the grid entirely. If we stay here too long, we're sitting ducks." Michael studied the map, his mind racing as he tried to think of a solution. "What about the human mercenary base you mentioned? Is it close enough for us to reach?" Reynolds shook his head. "It's too far from here. We'd need to make at least one jump to get there, and right now, that's too risky." Arya crossed her arms, clearly frustrated by their limited options. "So what do we do?" There was a long pause as everyone considered their next move. Then Michael had an idea. "We need a bigger distraction," he said, his voice low but firm. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Michael gestured to the map, pointing to a small, uninhabited moon orbiting one of the gas giants in the system. "If we create enough of a disturbance there, it could draw the Vexar's attention long enough for us to make the jump." Reynolds frowned. "You want to blow up a moon?" "Not the whole thing," Michael replied. "Just enough to make it look like something big is happening. A few well-placed charges, maybe a few seismic devices. The Vexar will think it's an attack or some kind of natural disaster, and they'll send everything they've got to investigate." Arya's eyes widened as she realized where Michael was going with this. "While they're distracted, we make our escape." Reynolds leaned back, considering the plan. "It's risky. If they catch on, we're dead." "But if it works," Michael added, "we'll be long gone before they even know what hit them." The room fell silent as everyone weighed the risks. Finally, Arya nodded. "It's our best shot," she said. "Let's do it." Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples as he stared at the map. "All right, we'll give it a shot. But if this goes sideways, we're all going to wish we'd stayed in that jungle." Hours later, the shuttle floated in the shadow of the small, barren moon. The surface was cracked and lifeless, a desolate landscape that had likely never been touched by sentient life. It was the perfect place to stage their distraction. Michael, Arya, and Krex suited up in the shuttle's airlock, preparing to deploy the seismic charges. The plan was simple. Plant the devices in strategic locations across the moon's surface, set them to detonate at intervals, and create the illusion of a large-scale event. As they stepped onto the moon's surface, the low gravity made their movements slow and deliberate. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, the gas giant looming in the distance like a silent sentinel. Michael set the first charge, embedding it into a crevice in the rocky ground. He glanced at Arya, who was planting the second device a few meters away. "How's it looking?" he asked over the comms. Arya's voice crackled in his ear. "We're almost done. Just a few more, and we're good to go." Krex was further ahead, placing the final charge near the edge of a massive crater. "This one's set. We're ready whenever you are." Michael took a deep breath and looked up at the shuttle, hovering silently above them. "Let's finish this." They made their way back to the shuttle, the charges ticking down behind them. Once inside, Michael and Arya removed their helmets, while Krex monitored the countdown on the ship's console. "Detonation in 30 seconds, Krex announced. Reynolds, seated in the cockpit, turned to face them. "Once those go off, we're making the jump. I don't care if they spot us, just get us out of here." Michael nodded, his heart pounding as he watched the timer tick down. This was it, their one chance to escape. 5 seconds, Krex said, his voice tense. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath as the final seconds ticked away. Then, with a flash of light, the moon's surface erupted. Dust and debris shot into space, the seismic charges detonating in a carefully orchestrated sequence. From a distance, it looked like the moon was tearing itself apart. "Go," Reynolds shouted, slamming the controls forward. The shuttle lurched into motion, rocketing away from the moon just as the Vigzar fighters began to swarm the area. They were too late. The mercenaries had already made the jump, disappearing into the void of space, leaving the Vigzar Empire scrambling to make sense of the destruction. For now, they were free. But Michael knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire caught up to them again, humanity's bold move. As the days turned into weeks, the anticipation in the Galactic Council grew. On Earth, humanity had mobilized in ways never before seen in its history. Nations set aside their differences, pooling resources, knowledge, and talent. The demand for a tribute was not something humanity would meet out of submission, it was a test of wills. Humanity had to show that they were not to be underestimated, but how? No one on Earth entertained the thought of actually paying the tribute. Instead, preparations were being made for a response so audacious that it would either solidify their place among the stars or doom them. The message from the Council had been straightforward: submit or face the consequences. It echoed across Earth's networks, sparking debate and fear. But more than that, it ignited a fire within the human spirit. Every man, woman, and child felt the weight of the situation. For many, it was a matter of pride, a matter of survival. Humanity, which had always thrived in adversity, was about to show its hand. In the orbit of Jupiter, hidden within the gas giant's upper atmosphere, the construction of something massive was nearing completion. What the rest of the galaxy didn't know, what even the Council hadn't anticipated, was that humanity had been preparing for a scenario like this for decades. Ever since the first contact with alien civilizations, secret projects had been greenlit by a coalition of Earth's most powerful governments. Hidden in the depths of space, beyond the prying eyes of alien probes and surveillance, humanity had been building its answer to the galaxy's arrogance. The hidden shipyards around Jupiter were churning out the most advanced warships humanity had ever conceived. They were sleek, powerful, and unlike anything the Council had ever seen. These vessels, designed in secrecy, were equipped with new technologies that had been gleaned from Earth's understanding of alien engineering, combined with the raw innovation and creativity that humanity was known for. Among these ships was the crown jewel of Earth's fleet, the Arcadia, a battleship that dwarfed anything ever constructed in human history. The Arcadia was more than a warship. It was a symbol of defiance, a message to the stars that humanity would not bow. Its hull, forged from alloys stronger than anything in known galactic databases, shimmered in the darkness of space. Its weapons systems were a blend of energy-based and projectile technology designed to overwhelm any defensive grid. Most importantly, it was powered by a new type of energy source, something that Earth's brightest minds had developed after years of research and experimentation. This power core, called the EOS reactor, allowed the ship to operate on an unparalleled level of efficiency and power, capable of matching the output of entire planetary systems. But more than the hardware, the ship was manned by the best humanity had to offer. A crew of soldiers, engineers, scientists, and tacticians who had been training in secret, honing their skills for the moment when Earth would stand toe-to-toe with the galaxy's mightiest. As the shipyards completed their final checks, Admiral Kiera Malloy stood on the bridge of the Arcadia, looking out over the vast expanse of stars. She had been selected for this mission not only because of her unparalleled tactical brilliance, but because she embodied the spirit of humanity, resilient, determined, and unyielding. The weight of what was about to happen rested heavily on her shoulders. She knew that the entire future of Earth depended on this gambit. "We're ready, Admiral," came a voice from behind her. Captain Jason Torres, her second-in-command, stood tall, his face reflecting the same mixture of confidence and uncertainty that everyone on the crew felt. Malloy nodded, her eyes still fixed on the stars. "Send the signal. It's time." Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Hundreds of ships, some still experimental, others tried and tested, began to power up. The hum of engines, the flicker of shields coming online, the soft glow of weapon systems priming for action. It was the sound of humanity readying for war. On Earth, the world's population watched with bated breath. Through secure communication channels, they were connected to the fleet. This was humanity's response to the Council's arrogance, and they would all witness it together. For the first time in centuries, Earth stood united under one banner. The blue and green of Earth's flag fluttered proudly on every screen, and the message was clear: we are not afraid. Back in the Council's chambers, the atmosphere had grown tense. They had received no tribute, no response from Earth other than a message that simply stated, "We will answer you in our own way." The Council members, having grown complacent in their power, assumed that humanity was stalling, unable to meet their demands. But then the signal came. Across the galaxy, the Council's vast network of communication relays picked up a broadcast. It was humanity's message, transmitted across every known frequency impossible to ignore. The face of Admiral Malloy appeared, her expression calm and resolute. "To the Galactic Council," she began, her voice steady, "you have demanded tribute from Earth. You have sought to test us, to belittle us. But you misunderstand. Humanity does not bow to tyrants. We are not a species of cowards or subservients. We are innovators, creators, and survivors. You will receive your answer shortly." And with that, the transmission cut off, leaving a stunned silence in the Council chambers. But it wasn't the message that shocked them. It was the next thing that appeared on their screens: the sight of the Arcadia emerging from hyperspace on the edge of the Council's territory, leading a fleet of warships unlike anything they had ever seen. Humanity wasn't coming to negotiate. They were coming to make a statement.